Okay, we're going to step back a little bit so we can get it on tape. We're going to go back to the emergent class. The emergent class is basically any vegetation that comes out of the water. So cattails, grasses, sedges. As you can see here, this is a little drier site. It's in the summertime. So the emergent vegetation is coming out. You don't see a lot of water. Although if you walk into this area, your feet will get wet. And then this next one is more of a spring image, coming into the emergent vegetation. A lot of times in the spring you'll see kind of the dead emergent vegetation coming up there, so you won't see a lot. You'll see a lot more water in the spring in these emergent classes. But you'll see these dead clumps of grasses as well, and that's a pretty good sign that it's an emergent class as well. Another spring image, we can see the cattails coming up. This emergent class actually has some shrub in it as well. But again, we're going for the overall view of this, and most of it is actually emergent class, cattails and grasses.
Where are the vernal ponds?
Vernal pools? Vernal pools will be wet in the spring, so most of the time you're going to only see those in the spring. Which would be
I know what they are. Are they included with the wetlands or not?
It depends on how big they are. Sometimes, a lot of times the vernal pools are really small and we won't pick them up. But if they're bigger, we'll pick them up in the spring photo. They'll be wet and we'll be able to pick that up. So a lot of those vernal pools will be picked up depending on how big they are. Some vernal pools are really small. We won't pick up.
Do you have a size requirement on those?
Yeah, anything that's about 1/10 of an acre or smaller, we won't probably pick up. Anything bigger than that, we're going to try and pick up. Again, if you have more detailed kind of wetland map, so if you have more detail, we'll definitely include it if you have those smaller wetlands as well. If you have that detail, we'll definitely include that into our map.
Are you doing this in Iowa?
No, a separate group is actually doing Iowa, updates for Iowa. There's a group out of St. Mary's University that does this update as well for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're doing Iowa. And I think they're just about complete with Iowa.
So is the whole country getting updated right now, and just by different groups?
It's mostly on a group-by-group basis. The Fish and Wildlife Service National Wetlands Inventory Program does not have a lot of funding to do updates. In fact, the original group from the Fish and Wildlife Service down in St. Petersburg, Florida, I think St. Petersburg, Florida, they had a big shop that they're doing down there, doing all the NWI updates. That closed 2 years ago. So basically the NWI has NWI coordinators. The coordinators work with different groups like this, and then St. Mary's to do the updates. Another emergent photo is not real great, but you can see behind the shrub here there's a lot of emergent vegetation growing that's wet. Cattail area on the side of the road. This is a big cattail area. Another emergent class. Cattails are emergent. See a lot of cattails. Moving on to the scrub. Basically, it's shrubby vegetation that's short. Shrub is actually technically defined as anything under 20 feet tall. So you will pick up, owned by a wetland, actually it was a forest restoration project this week. Basically, it was in the floodplain of a river. You can tell that they planted all these trees. It was all wet, and it's basically a floodplain vegetation. But the trees are only, yay tall. So technically right now that's a scrub wetland, but eventually, 20, 30 years, those trees will grow up and will convert into a forested wetland. But anything that's technically under 20 feet or lower is a scrub wetland. Again, you'll see some potholes like this. You can see a lot of woody vegetation in here. It's considered a scrub wetland. Sometimes you just see this along the side of the road. It's really thick vegetation. It's wet. Again, it's all woody vegetation, which is a shrub class. It's short. It's not a tree. Forested wetlands. Moving on to the forested wetlands. A lot of times in the spring, even though there's not water, but you'll see kind of the bare patches in here, which is pretty typical of a forested wetland. A lot of times you're going to see forested wetlands in depressions. So as you're driving by, you'll see kind of the depression of the trees. In the springtime, sometimes this will be filled with water. Getting more towards the beginning of the summer, in the middle of the summer, it'll look more like this, where there's no vegetation. It's just kind of bare ground. That's due to the water being on there for a long time in the spring and the vegetation hasn't come up yet. Pretty good sign of a forested wetland. If you know your trees, a lot of times you can look for the sycamores, the red maples, things like that, which are more of a forested wetland type class. You don't need to know the trees though, you can just kind of look for these depressions in the areas for the wet and the trees growing. Again, in the summertime it'll look maybe more like this. It'll still maybe be wet with the trees growing up. Again, what you're going to want to look for on the side of the road is just going to be depression with the trees growing, which is pretty typical of a forested wetland. And of course, on the wetlands that we've identified for the field maps, if we've identified it as a wetland, forested wetland, on the field maps, it's probably going to be wet or in a depression because that's what we saw in the photo, which is really kind of a wet area on the photo in the spring. So even though you're going out there in the summertime, if it looks like a depression with the trees growing, it's probably a forested wetland. Another example, in the center here, kind of depression, have a little bit of water, the trees growing up. Pretty straightforward. Another area, this area is a lot more wet, but it's actually standing water in there with the trees growing. Forested wetland. And then there'll be the conversion ones too. As far as a lot of times you go out in the field, especially in the summertime, it'll be all soybeans or corn or whatever. Just take a picture of the field. It was converted, there's no wetland there anymore. Housing developments, a lot of times there was a wetland there originally, and then the housing development came up, converted due to development. Those are pretty straightforward to agricultural development, why it was converted. Again, this is kind of the cheat sheet. This is going to remind me to show you guys that this is we have a laminated version, so those in the back that kind of gives you a feel for what the different classes are with different photos on there that you can pick up to help you when you're in the field to tell what the different classes are. Other things to think about when you're in the field, it's always a good idea to pull off to the side of the road and use your hazard lights so that people know that you've stopped by the side of the road. When I was out in the field this week driving around, there weren't very many cars, especially on the back roads. I didn't have any problems with traffic or anything like that. I was pretty isolated, not a lot of people out there. If you do get stopped and someone stops and say, hey, what are you doing? There's a couple different things you can tell them. Obviously, you're looking at wetlands and doing inventory. But another thing, if you're not comfortable with that, I printed a bunch of these out there. They're on the back table as well. You can just hand them one of these, and it kind of goes over what we're doing with the project. A lot of times the one thing that people have been a little bit sensitive about is, especially sometimes the farmers, when you're taking pictures of the wetlands, they're sometimes sensitive if it's a wetland, they're afraid that it's going to be regulated, so they're not going to be able to farm that anymore. The assessment we're doing, the National Wetlands Inventory, is not a regulatory wetland program. It's a resource inventory of the wetlands for habitat. So that's one thing if people are sensitive about, the government's going to not let me do anything because it's a wetland. This is not a regulatory program. This is an assessment, resource assessment. And one of the bullets in here is basically kind of explains that process. This is not this is a resource assessment. It's not a regulatory program. So that would be good to bring with you as well. I can make more of these if people want as well, in case someone stops you and asks you what you're doing. Again, be mindful.